I'm having a bad day.
The world ain't all sunshine and rainbows.
Very true. On that note, I think I'll throw in the towel and go see a movie.
The world's a very mean and nasty place, Cam, and it will beat you to your knees and keep you there permanently if you let it.
So maybe I can do it. Maybe it's easier than I thought.
You, me, or nobody is going to hit as hard as life.
Oh, well, I might as well give up.
But it ain't how hard you hit, it's about how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward.
I might hit you in a minute. Welcome to It's About Nothing.
We've got to apologise. I think that opening was it was pretty terrible, let's face it. I don't know if these little openings are so bad that they're actually quite good.
You need me on the. I need to write the scripts, Nick.
I don't know if it's the scripts. I think it's the delivery of
Oh, gee, Nick, I actually stayed up late last night rehearsing that, and I'm putting a lot of my heart into it.
Did you? Do you know? And I think you know where. No, you didn't. No, I didn't. I didn't rehearse either. I think it's terrible. One of my colleagues at work actually said he really enjoys the podcast, but he has to get past that first initial 5 seconds of the script.
I like the idea, like we can just like do the podcast staff meeting in the podcast itself. So we can just like make, the podcast about nothing could actually become the podcast about making the podcast itself.
Oh, yeah, that's a really good idea. That should be the next podcast. The podcast about making a podcast about...
It's like dealing with like all the minutiae of making the podcast and like boredom, and like insecurities and just like, how much effort you put into your hair even though no one can see it.
Oh, my hair? God, I was just getting...
I've just got hair jealousy, Nick. You know that.
What's that?
I've got hair jealousy.
Oh, I thought you said I've got hair gel in today, and I was going to say...
No, well, you couldn't tell, could you? You couldn't tell.
Yeah, so I selected that quite... As always, I try and select an opening script that is somewhat, even if tenuously aligned with the topic today. And you know what that's from? The script very badly taken from a movie.
Rocky.
Yeah. Do you know which Rocky, actually?
No, I have no idea. I just know it's Rocky.
I thought it was from the original, but actually I think I've just realised it's from Rocky Balboa, which is number 6.
All right. I have seen it. Yeah. Because it's a much newer one, obviously.
Well, yeah, sort of. Well, it was 10 years ago, I think. It was like...
I've got to the point in my life where 10 years ago feels like about 2 years ago.
Yeah. Well, yeah, so growing up, as you and I are the same age, we grew up in the era of like the action movie stars and the bodybuilders, like the Schwarzeneggers, the Stallones, and all those guys. And I reckon that those guys probably inspired generations of young men in the sort of 80s and 90s to go out and lift weights.
Have you been to Philadelphia?
No.
So in Philadelphia, in that, I guess it's the original Rocky, that scene where he runs up and down the steps of the building, like, and then at the top.
Yeah.
You can't see this on the podcast. I'm like lifting my arms up in the air.
Cameron's putting his arms in the air like Rocky.
Yeah. So there's actually a statue at the top of that staircase. I can't remember if it's like a public library or an art gallery, but it's like a, nice old fine looking building, and they actually built a statue up there, which is kind of cool. So all day people run up and down that staircase and then pose next to the statue.
Oh, do they?
So it's a very obvious case of inspiration.
Yeah, well, I like. I always enjoyed those movies because I think they're the sort of movies you watch, and you definitely can't help but watch something like that and feel a little bit motivated yourself, because they present Stallone as being sort of down and out, and he's a bit. In fact, I think in the first one, he's kind of someone who had a lot of potential that he never really pushed himself hard enough, and then
as an actor.
No, in the movie he portrays that character. Yeah. Like you remember Rocky as winning the competition and everything and training hard, but actually in all the movies they always set like this mental barrier for him first.
Yeah, that's interesting actually, like the mental and the physical. I'm sure we'll probably get into that when we're chatting with Fred.
Yeah, well, indeed, yeah. So our first guest, our only guest, we only ever have one guest, is is Fred Liberatore. So he'll have to actually tell me how to pronounce his surname with a lot more Italian. I think I'm terrible at
accent.
Yeah, the accent. But so this one of the topics I was interested in covering a while ago was looking at the psychology of fitness, and also not just fitness, like getting yourself in shape, but maybe taking it to the next level as well. Like what kind of mental state you have to get yourself into to really push yourself. And Fred has a really 4 decades of experience, not just in fitness, but also in competition bodybuilding. He's also a kettlebell expert. He's like I think level 1 and 2 certified expert. He's got various accreditations. So he's a wellness certified person. He's a food coach. He's an author. He runs his own business as well. So it's called Real Fit. And amongst many other things, I imagine. We'll get into that shortly. But so we brought Fred in today in part because we want to hear from someone who actually he's dedicated his life to fitness, to understand, not just what you can do physically, but also mentally. And I think that's, I guess, where we want to take the conversation today. So what I might do is invite Mr. Liberatore in, and we'll get going.
Welcome, Fred.
Thank you so much. Really excited to be on this podcast, your first visitor. So I'm really, really pumped about that. And thanks so much for having me on.
Very cool.
Yes, I should clarify, Fred. So we have had guests on the other podcast, but you're
okay.
So you're our first visitor for today.
The first fitness one. Yeah.
Yes. Fred, out of interest, you're obviously someone who's got a long history of fitness and pushing yourself to the limits. When I was talking about like the Rockies and all those sorts of things, was that something that ever got your interest when you were growing up as well?
Look, it did. I sort of grew up in the 80s. I'm nearly 55 as of next month. So, what piqued my interest was at the time when I grew up, there wasn't really, gyms were sort of a men's club, like an over 40s men's club. So it was quite interesting when I grew up. It wasn't like the gyms that you see today. It was very old school bodybuilding type of thing. So what piqued my interest was I used to look at all the magazines that people threw away, the bodybuilding magazines, out in the front of the news agencies, ready for collection for recycling. So I used to look at that, and that piqued my interest a lot. But I remember my older brother taking me to a Rocky movie, and I'm not sure, it might have been the first one, and it was at the Greater Union in Russell Street. And I'll never forget the line going out. It was about 100 feet long, and it was amazing. Those were the days, as they say. Life was much simpler in the 80s. But what piqued my interest was more coming from a very competitive background with my twin brother. We were both very, very competitive in sport, and with the surname, the Liber surname and the liver known as Liber, as you say, very hard to abbreviate, Liberatore, which is the Italian way to say it.
But we
say Liber. So that really piqued my interest. It was more having that competitive spirit in football. That was the catalyst for change for me.
Yeah, that's quite interesting, actually. Like, I was thinking what the gym was like in, say, 1985, or whatever, compared to what the gym's like today, and who was going to the gym, and just how welcoming a gym was then compared to now. Like, obviously gyms are really big business now, so they want to get you through their doors. But if I wanted, if you were just a first time gym user back in the 80s, what was that experience like going in there?
Well, the experience was kind of who you know. So it would be a lot of a buddy system where you'd have a training partner that would introduce you into the gym, because at that time, personal trainers really didn't come about till the late 80s. So it wasn't, that people had personal trainers. It was just, a mate would ring a mate and then would be, let's just meet you at the gym. And we'd meet every Wednesday, Thursday and Saturday at, 8 a.m. or whatever it might be. So in those days, it was a very, what's the word I want? It was a very niche sport, and it wasn't, there wasn't sort of the muscle Marys that you see today, or the people on their phone taking photos or every 5 minutes. It's changed so much. And it was, torn t-shirts and just, sweating and but the great thing is, in the 80s, it was a lot of people would help each other. Like, you would walk past a squat rack and someone would actually help spot you. Whereas these days, it's very uncomfortable for someone to say to someone, hey, do you mind if you give me a spot?
Yeah. Yeah. We're all in our little zones in the gym now, aren't we? Like, partly because we're plugged in, maybe, like, we're working by ourselves, but we're listening to music or podcast or whatever we're doing. So we tend to be in little bubbles in the gym.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've Arnold Schwarzenegger talks about when he was at the gym, you'd always have a partner, and they'd always be pushing you, and then you'd push them back.
Yep.
And you are 100% focused on the activity. And he was talking about how now today everyone is there. People do a set, then they get on their phone, make a call, they listen to something, and then 5 minutes has passed, so they take it easy.
And then what they we'd also have a little sort of community. So if you wanted to socialize, you'd go out and have, chicken breasts and egg whites rather than, socialize in the gym. The gym was a place of kind of worship, if you like. So it was a temple of doom, if you like. It was a place where people would actually go and hit the iron. And the other thing was, there was equipment called Nautilus that was introduced in the late 70s, early 80s, and that changed the framework of gyms. So usually back in the 60s and 70s, gyms were just mainly barbells and dumbbells and a few other plate-loaded equipment. But then all of a sudden in the 80s, 90s, and now, all the machines came in, and the machines are very one-dimensional, whereas what that means is you don't really need to activate your balance muscles when you're on the machine. So it changed, the landscape changed so much, sometimes not always for the better.
There's also a risk, isn't there, Fred, as well, people going to the gym and the machines are so accessible that people use them and they don't really know what they're doing with them. So you can... Totally.
Gyms are full of, the way the big chain gyms work is that they're full of cardio equipment, the meters and meters long of cardio equipment. And to be honest with you, that's not really the way a proper gym should be set up. And, it should be more free weights, kettlebells, that kind of stuff. So there are safety features along with those, and I think it's important. But yeah, it's changed. The gyms have very much changed the whole landscape. And I loved it back in the 80s. I really did. There would be old equipment rattling and, it'd be old school training, and everyone would just be there to actually train, like you said. And as Cam said, we were wired in a lot. And that seems to be a little bit of a problem, I think, today.
Do you think that is a shift to cardio? Because there was I reckon it was, I don't know if this is right or not, but in maybe the late 90s, they started saying to stop eating fat, eat lots of carbs, and do lots of cardio. Was that around that time?
Yeah, not so much. And the problem was, gyms would have maybe a stationary bike. You really wouldn't see a treadmill. But the reason why gyms are full of cardio now is because our lifestyle is more sedentary, and we're a lot more in a seated position more than ever for up to 8 hours a day. So our muscles aren't contracting. And the whole thing is that your muscles are designed to contract. And if you're in a seated position, the problem is, and you're in a sedentary position, that's why cardio machines were more so introduced.
Yeah, I have used the treadmill from time to time. Like I live in Canberra, and the best form of fitness I know is running. like, and we could probably talk about that in terms of motivation, because I have a love-hate relationship with it in a way. It's something I did from a really young age and my dad got me into, but then sometimes I sort of hate it because, you know, you got to break through a pain barrier, and sometimes the treadmill can be kind of easy in winter and stuff like that, but it's also sort of depressing. Like, I've almost had these moments of existentialism on the treadmill, because it's like you're not actually going anywhere, right?
Yeah.
And then you're sort of running along, and now there's always wonderful computers and stuff, and you can simulate a course and have all these images even and everything. But at the end of the day, it's very different from actually being outdoors, like, and not just in terms of the terrain and the up and the down, but just like the air you're breathing, the temperature, all that sort of thing.
Yeah, so running's a funny one. I've trained a lot of runners in my life, and a lot of runners, they want that endorphin effect that you're talking about. They want that real feel-good effect. And once you get hooked into weight training, that gives you that. So to be honest with you, and I'm going to throw it out here, I'm not a big fan of running just because of the impact that it has on the joints.
It's screwed. All long-term runners, their knees are like screwed.
Yeah, shot.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I can show, like, and Nicholas has experienced this. You can do like 3 or 4 minutes on the kettlebell, which is an equivalent to probably, you know, couple 100 meters of running, and still have that effect, that cardio effect that it gives you.
Yeah,
absolutely. So Fred, what if we were to look at the, like, because Cameron's actually opened up the topic of like how fitness is related mentally. Like, I found I started off a bit like you, Cam, with when I started running. It was when I think I was 18 properly. I did a bit at school, but then I was out of shape, and I thought, I'm going to start running, and I hated it. Like, I ran 1 kilometer, and it was so painful that I couldn't stand it. But now I use it as per Fred's comment, it's actually, I think, more psychological now, where I go for a run because it de-stresses me. It gets me out. If I run outside, away from, you know, like long distances, there's something cathartic about it. You get to the end of it and it feels like you've done something.
Yeah, I agree. That's what I'm saying. Like, I didn't get that experience so much on the treadmill.
Yeah.
So when you're like, you know, I've done it sometimes for convenience's sake, and you've got a limited amount of time or whatever it might be, or it's it's just pelting down rain. But what I'm interested in exploring is why you get more outside than doing it.
Yeah, and I think, you know, like, when you exercise at home, or when you're doing something at home compared to doing it outside of your environment, whether it's a gym or, as Nicholas says, running around outside of home, I see your home as your sanctuary. I see it's a place of rest, a place of eating, so a place of selling. Very, very, very difficult to train at home. And that's a big statement because at the end of the day, people see their homes as a place, not as a place of kind of pain, if you like. And I think lockdown taught us this when I had a few clients training at home. Compared to training at a gym, it was just chalk and cheese. You know, if you don't take instructions well, you'll struggle training at home, guaranteed.
Yeah.
So what do you see, Fred, out of interest? Because you've probably trained and seen lots of different people come through. You get different personalities, right?
Yep.
Are there like some triggers, do you think, that happen to people that get them to think, I'm going to get in shape now? Like, what are those triggers? Why do they do it?
So definitely, I've seen, I can, like, I'm writing, when I say I can write a book about it, well, I am writing a book about it. So I see there's a couple of things that come to mind. So one of the things that I do when I consult clients is I say, and the main thing is the magic bullet, I say, on a scale of 1 to 10, how committed are you to achieving your goals? If they generally say a 10, then I know that they're committed to their goal. If they say anything below 7, I know I have to work on their why they want the goal. So to answer your question in as straightforward as I possibly can, the key is to take instructions well. If you do not take instructions well, and what I mean by instructions is, this is the program we're going to set for you. We both agree that you've got 15, let's say 15 kilos to lose. We both agree that it's going to take 6 to 12 months. We both agree that you're going to set a deadline to say stop eating by a certain time. You're going to increase your whole foods and things like that. So I find that there's no magic bullet. It's a lot of hard work, but I find that people that succeed are the people that don't necessarily question a lot, and they just take the instructions well. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, that's interesting. So they have to be engaged with it, obviously. So
Yeah. Because
so,
quite often they'll lose track, or they'll see something on television, or they'll see a celebrity come out with a certain diet, and they're looking for clues, and but they're looking the wrong places. They're not understanding about themselves and what their body type is and how their body responds to certain things. So once they look in rather than look out, that's when success really happens. And once they get educated on what their body type is and how, like, it could be their genetic factor or whatever it might be, then they understand. So the problem today with the industry as such is that it's all smoke and mirrors, to be honest with you. There's a lot of smoke and mirrors in our industry. There's a lot of flaky promises. There's a lot of, one day it's keto, the next day it's vegan, and then the next day it's something else. So that's a really big problem in our industry.
Is there, like, based on that, are there kind of like one or two myths or things that have been around recently where you kind of go, oh, that was a terrible trend? Is there anything you can think of that was not a good idea?
I'll be honest with you and put it out there. I think the first thing that comes to mind is the MLM model and the multi-level marketing. Take these series of capsules and pills and powders and you'll lose weight. So that's number one.
Yeah.
And then number two, the other myth is that you've got to train to failure to get results, where that only sets you up for failure. So they're the two things that come to mind. Just the lies and the promises and the whole thing about, taking supplements all day and not eating whole foods, and then training to failure. And, a lot of people want attention. A lot of the popular social media fitness people are craving that space. So therefore they're doing crazy things, and it might be just really extreme stuff. And one thing I know is extreme doesn't work. And as I said, the reason I think I've been in the industry for over 4 decades is because I haven't competed every year. I've just taken my time, and I've seen people come and go because and it's just, so that's probably the two things that come to mind, Nicholas.
Fred, could you just unpack what you mean by train to failure for those listeners who might not be?
Yeah, so what training to failure means is that every workout you've got to really, really push yourself and, just basically burst the blood vessel.
It's not real unless it hurts.
No, exactly.
Yeah.
And that's what I mean. And that all that does is encourage injuries, and that sets you up to fail.
It's interesting. Are men more prone to do that than women, or not necessarily?
Not necessarily.
Yeah. Okay.
I can talk about the different aspects of men and women when it comes to goal setting, that's for sure.
Yeah. I have heard this phenomenon about men, maybe men, in their 40s and above, and I'm in that territory now, who, might let the fitness go for a while, or they might be keeping it up to some extent, but that a hider of the weekend warrior. So like you get really busy during the week, and you do get to the gym on the weekend, or you do get on the bike or on the running track or whatever it is you're doing, and then you're hitting it really hard, but you've had no preparation, there's no consistency, and it's just like straight out of the bag, and getting yourself in trouble in various ways there, like possibly injuring yourself, or even doing something worse.
What I found with men, Cam, is quite often, and this seems to be repetitive. When men around between 35 and 55 come and see me for a weight loss journey or whatever it might be, I find that generally life has just rollballed them, and basically it's either been their career that's been front and center, or raising their kids that's been front and center. And what I often find is the reason why they come and see me is they're out in the playground with their kids and they can't even pick them up to put them up on the monkey bars, or they can't even keep up with them. So then there's signals to say, oh, they've been working, 18 hours, like insane amounts of hours. So they just, whether it's because they're trying to be a breadwinner or they're trying to, whatever it is, I find that men come to me in a state of emergency, generally speaking. That like I'm training a urologist and he's operating, insane amounts of hours and things like that. And, he said to me quite honestly, he goes, I had the car, I had the house, I had everything. I had, $2,000-$3,000 suits that don't fit me. All for what? For the fact that my health has been put in the back burner. And I often say, if you don't look after your body for the first 50 years, it won't look after you for the next 50.
Yeah, that's really interesting to keep in mind. I mean, I know, like, for some of us, I probably fit into this category to some extent. Like, when I was, a young fella, I was, never had any weight issues. I was pretty naturally fit. I was running around a lot. I was a swimmer and sort of athletics and that sort of thing. But if you're like that, you can take your health and fitness for granted to some extent going into your 20s. So after you leave school and those teenage years where you're naturally signed up in a lot of sport anyway, and then you're out partying, career starts to take over. The next thing you know, you are 35, and weight's definitely a factor, but it's not always weight. It's other things like just energy levels, muscle tone, whatever it is.
Sleep's a big one. Men come to me with sleep issues.
Yeah, so that's an interesting one, Fred. So basically, one of the triggers you described there is it's not being able to keep up with your kids, and it's kind of something lost there, isn't it? Because you have this image of playing with your kids and enjoying life, and it's almost a little bit embarrassing as well, isn't it? If your kids are running rings around you and you're getting puffed out.
Yeah, and also, I'm not a drinker, and I don't drink at all. But every time you drink a glass of wine, you're adding, and I'm here to say that there's a balance, but you're adding, 300-400 calories. So you have a drink every night, and then it accumulates and amplifies, and it doesn't just make you put on weight, it also makes you very acidic, and there's a fine balance that you have to work with. And I think, Cam, what you said about in your earlier life, the other thing is, if you haven't played sport or any form of sport in your earlier life, you're going to struggle later on in life. And this is why I think sports curriculums in schools are very, very important. And, if you don't play any sport at all, you're going to struggle with doing anything physical, rest assured.
I think that's a good point, because I know just from my own experience, like I did a lot of sport in various ways at school, and even by the standards of the school, probably not as much as others, but it was just that sort of environment where sport was a big part of the curriculum, and sort of understanding like even pain thresholds and getting up early for training and doing all that sort of thing. You've got some exposure to that at a young age. Actually, this sort of takes me to a side point with like, I'm not a real morning person, or I've become more of a morning person than I used to be, but I've sort of worked out that if I'm going to go to the gym and do exercise, I'm actually better doing it in the late afternoon, and I feel I am anyway. And I wondered if you had any
definitely
sort of on time of day.
So what I understand and what I've tested and measured is quite often, Cam, you've got to do the hard stuff in your life first, early in the morning. And when I look at even the entrepreneurs and a lot of things what I understand is the morning is when you're at your peak. And your body's testosterone levels for men are at its peak. I find that the morning is the absolute best time of day to train, get it out of the way. And I don't believe this, I'm not a morning person sort of business. And it's not about being a drill sergeant or anything like that, but I think that's just an excuse. If you're not a morning person, go to bed an hour earlier.
So if I was coming to you as a prospective client, you'd advise me to like sort of bite the bullet and do my training in the morning and try and get into a rhythm with that.
Yeah, so I advise, and I do two things, and I've always done these two things in my life, is I test and I measure. And what we do is we test the measure, and I say, okay, Cam, let's go for the next month just in the mornings. Let's create morning rituals. And, and everyone knows morning is the best part. Your brain's functioning, your body's up. There's no excuse. There's no obstacle. In the evening, there tends to be an obstacle. I've got to put the kids to bed. I've got to do this. And things come up. We understand things come up in your life. But I find myself, I love training in the mornings. And that's not to say that I can't mix it up, but that's my non-negotiable.
Yeah, it's a good point. Like, you set aside that.
I think that's an excuse. It's just another obstacle that you're just putting in front of you. Yeah. It really is just another obstacle that you put in front of you. It really is. And having these 24/7 gyms, I think it's not a good thing, because we're not designed to, and it's hard for shift workers. Yeah. But our body's circadian rhythms aren't designed to train at 3 a.m. because we have to. The whole thing with sleep is it's a natural way to rest and recover and let everything settle.
Yeah.
What do you think, Fred, about as well? Like, because that's all really good in terms of the fitness, and then there's also especially with circadian rhythms, how and throughout the day the stress will lead you to certain foods. So I remember when I was when I had my last real job, like in an organisation. All these workplaces now have these donation chocolate bars everywhere. They plonk them down everywhere. Yeah. And I used to laugh thinking, so you basically the donation for, like, let's say it could be something as ironic as diabetes or something like that.
Yeah.
Have some chocolate.
So as a wellness coach, I actually was involved in this, where I went into a business and we changed the chocolate bars for a fruit basket. And now there's a lot of companies, or pre-COVID, there was a lot of companies that would offer fruit baskets in the morning. And you'd start your day off with the fruit basket, and you'd start your day off with whole foods. And I think a lot of people, Nicholas, get this whole confused. Food is, there's a couple of things with food. There's two purposes of food. One is recreational. So food is, a way of celebrating life, a way of getting the family together at Christmas time and that sort of thing. The other one is nutritional. So if you can combine the nutritional aspect and make that about 80% or even 70% and have 30% recreational, I think that's a really good balance. So a lot of people often ask me about food and what's your take on food and what's this and that and that. And I'm like, how about you keep it 70% nutritional and 30% recreational? Yeah,
that's really interesting. We've all come through the pandemic in different ways, or we're still coming through it with, sort of lockdown. And I've been working from home like a lot of people. And I found one of the negatives of that have been that, I'll go into my kitchen between meetings, and it's funny because I've got a bar sitting there with like a fully stocked bar, but I don't sort of have a scotch in the middle of the day. But I'll see there's a jar full of Tim Tams or something like that. So I'll be like, the world's a pretty depressing place at the moment, so I'm going to have 2 Tim Tams between these meetings. Like, there's a lot going on.
COVID really tested everyone's waistline, and it tested it really well. Like, I would even admit that our bins were getting emptied every day and our dishwasher was full every day. And that meant that we were consuming more calories than what we should be. Yeah. It was a tough time. There's no doubt about it. Not the time to sort of think about that ratio of recreational and nutritional, but there are triggers that enabled you to sort of we look at food during comfort, especially when we're in a state and when we're in lockdown. Food was a comfort. So, and I think it's just that relationship we all have with food. And one of my non-negotiables, Cam, is like Mum just turned 90 yesterday and we went out for lunch, and my non-negotiable is I will never have dessert. I don't drink. And I set a deadline to stop eating by 7 p.m. and it's like the kitchen is...
That's an interesting
So if you have non-negotiables in your life, without being a food Nazi and without being too hard on yourself, a couple of the non-negotiables, and you can amplify it a little bit and just, you know, like I was thinking about this podcast this morning on the way home from gym around lunchtime, and I thought, what's something I really want to give you guys with some information? And I think one of the things is we seek perfection too quickly. We want perfection. It's like a Formula One driver goes to Formula 4, Formula 3, Formula 2, and especially with our goals and our nutrition and our training, we want it all Monday morning, 9 o'clock. We want to change the world. We want to go on a new diet. And the thing is, we're, as humans, I think we're not designed to be perfect, and we're just seeking this perfection. And the industry, as I said, is laced with tapping into your insecurities and saying, you can do this, you know, you can drop a dress size in 7 days and you can do all this rapid weight loss and, you know, talking ketones and all this sort of thing. And there's no problem with that, but we're just being kind of brainwashed a bit. So it's okay to fail is what I'm saying. And but it's okay just to fail for a short period and then pick yourself up. But quite what often is, we fail and then we fail even more and we become really, really great at failing.
So you've got a good connection though with that, because you've obviously, Fred, competed in like the bodybuilding, right? So that's to get to that level where you actually win a competition, you have to be, it's not just losing weight and getting some muscle tone. You've got to move into this extra level, which most people will never actually think to do. They can't do that at all. But the idea of it, what are the sort of things you have to do to get there? Like how hard is it?
Oh, it's I'll tell you what, it's only hard if you make the goal hard and if you don't amplify the why and say, so one of my goals was I wanted to win a Mr. Australia. That was just one of my goals in life. As a bodybuilder, I wanted to win a Miss Australia. Look, it was tough. You have to think about it, sleep about it, breathe about it, and eat about it 24/7. And I ended up winning the Mr. Australasia, which was even better. So, yeah, it was tough. But and I've trained a few bodybuilders and they've won competitions, and they're the ones that take instructions well, which was what I was saying earlier. And it's okay, like I said, if people want to lose, say, 9 kilos or whatever it might be, as long as you take instructions well and you amplify your why. Why is it that you want to do it? We can work on the how we're going to do it. But if you amplify your why, the goal is that high up in your hierarchy of yourself that it kind of becomes easier. You just do it.
So do you get though, like, so let's say you're doing that training, does it get to a point where you're making progress and mentally you're so focused that it's like, I'm just doing this now, that's it?
Yeah, you're on autopilot, yep.
Right, and you don't get this sort of moment where you go, oh, I could probably have something like that.
Yeah, no.
Doesn't happen.
No.
Yeah,
it just doesn't happen, because at the end of the day, I even had a coach, and the coach weighs you and measures you, and like, you're doing this hard work and you're already, and to get ready for a competition, Nicholas, so you understand, it takes about 16 weeks of just ass to the grass, just going for it. So if you're not mentally prepared in those 16 weeks and then your goal isn't clear enough.
Yeah, because I've done 3 marathons.
Yep.
And the last 2, mentally I was not there. I did not the
Yeah.
first time. I actually had a plan, and I had the thing. It was all there, and I was like, I'm going to follow this thing, and it was an unknown. So I thought I've got to follow it because I don't know what I'm going to be facing if I don't do it. The second time, I don't know what it was, overconfidence, but I went, oh, I can do this. I've just got to run and do lots of running and train just like I did before. And I got out there and I took off too hard and too fast, and I ended up injuring myself, and I couldn't. My time was terrible. And then the third time I fell for the same trap again. I did exactly the same thing. And I go back to it thinking it was definitely physical because I didn't train properly. But the first time mentally, I was like 100% in. That was it. I'm doing this. And I can't work out though, why is it I was mentally connected then, but I couldn't do it the second and third time. I'm trying to work out what's the difference.
I think the difference is, without knowing too much about it, is there wasn't enough of an obstacle in front of you. Like it's a 28K or whatever. How many kilometre marathon was it?
Oh, no, it was the 42 one. Was
it the same marathon event? Like it was a different one. So did you whiteboard it? Did you plan it on, put pen to paper? A lot of my clients, when I've prepared them for a comp, is I'll ask them for a weekly focus sheet. And one of those things would be, as your personal coach, how else can I help you? Because we don't understand what everyone's thinking. But I think for you, Nicholas, and being in the running, it should have been more analytical with regards to, did you set yourself a run time? Did you practice that run time over 42 kilometers? Did you try different things before you ran? Like, did you have a rice cake with some honey on it? Or did you eat what did you do? The way I would have approached it was I would have tested and measured different scenarios so that when it comes to run time, chances are you would have beat your previous run time because you threw a few things up in the air and you see how it sticks.
Yeah, right. So basically it's like applying some science to it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, really.
And measuring that science and repeating and analyzing it and, working it out. And it's like, and I think for me, I never went into the same competition as I did the last comp. The first, it would be the Mr. Victoria, then the Mr. Australia, then the Australasia, not sort of like it'd be different competitions because different competitions meant different titles, if you like, as well. I probably would have even suggested a different marathon time so that you could have worked out what's your ideal time in that marathon, maybe a shorter marathon or a longer one or whatever it might be. So I would have just investigated it and whiteboarded it a bit more.
Yeah. Fred, you mentioned before that many of us now lead quite a sedentary lifestyle in terms of, obviously we're sitting at desks a lot of the time, computers, maybe we go home, we're sitting on the couch, watching Netflix, whatever it is. And if you look back 100, 200 years ago, a lot of humans were doing much more physical things, whether they were out in the fields, farming, plowing a field, labor, that sort of thing. So in evolution of humanity, are we somehow losing touch with what we're meant to be doing, physically as people?
We're not, somehow we are.
Yeah.
And it's the saddest thing. And things like rolling on the ground as adults, I find some adults can't even roll on the ground, and then stand up, going to a stand-up position or just, just crawling on the ground. And Nick knows about this with the bear crawls. You know where I'm going with this?
Oh, yeah, the torture, the bear crawls. No,
But the honest truth is, Cam, that's not going away. So that's history, and we can't live like we can from 100 years ago. It's just not doable today. Yeah. But what we can do is we can be smarter with our exercise choices, and we can do what's called more compound lifting, which is, things like deadlifts and bench press and squat. And they're the things that our body it's best for our body, so to speak. Yeah. And the thing is, we're not knowledgeable because a lot of the gyms are just machine driven.
Yeah.
And cardio driven. And that's even worse, if you ask me, because that's not going to cut the mustard, so to speak. So we've got to just be more individually more intelligent than we've got to have our own responsibility. And I don't go to any fast food restaurants. I haven't been to a McDonald's literally in 20, 30 years. I don't know what an inside of a McDonald's looks like, or a fast food outlet for that matter. And I'm not here to say that that's the bad thing. I'm just here to say that we need to take responsibility as individuals. And that's what we need to do. And we need to be more educated and informed.
Yeah, it's a slight shift, but you were talking before about working with, people 35, 55, but if you go younger, particularly young guys, we talk a lot about body image, and we often think about body image for young women growing up, but I'm sort of conscious of body image being a big factor for young men as well. So I'm wondering, do you have young fellas come to you, they want to be ripped, they want to be big, and they want to do it really quickly?
Yeah, I don't take them on. Literally, I do not take them on. I've got some kids of parents that come in. Like I've got a kid that's a awesome rower, and he wants to be better at rowing, and he rows for a private college, so he wants to improve his row time. Yeah. But what happens with the younger kids is they're the ones that are the keyboard warriors that see something on the internet and believe it, and they basically believe that they've got to take copious amounts of protein powder and bulk up and eat all this chicken breast and do all these things, only to find that they fail.
Yeah, I wonder about that, because I know, with a regular gym, I think you have to be 18 to join the gym, right? But there are.
I think it's 16. I think it's 16.
16, is it?
Yeah.
But they can do it they have to be supervised, maybe, or something like that. I know, in schools and stuff, people are doing it. In terms of weights, when's the right time for someone to start doing weights?
It'd go back to their genetic disposition, so it depends on their genetic structure. But again, I would suggest anything from 14, 15 onwards. Kids are especially young boys that I've trained before, their testosterone is surging at an unbelievable rate. Yeah. And they're either sleeping all day or training or eating out of home, whatever it might be. Yeah. I've got a kid that age, or I've had a kid that age. And the thing is, again, it just depends. What I would suggest with kids that age is get to understand their body weight, get to do chin-ups, get to do push-ups. But what happens is quite often is they injure themselves at that age because they're trying to impress their mates and, they're trying to lift the copious amounts of weights. But so I really don't take on that market, and I find that that's not my market. Yeah. And what I was saying earlier on, Cam, on the subject about men approach weight loss or lean muscle different to women. Totally different. So men like monkey see, monkey do. This is what you got to eat. You just eat it. You show up, you train. Women are very, very different when it comes to the whole way they view their weight loss, lean muscle, that kind of stuff. They question things a lot more. Like they want to know the ins and outs of it. And they are such a different species to us males when it comes to how they view their food and how they view their weight loss.
So what when you get you got the guy who comes in and he says he can't run around with his kids, and then what are the other ones? What are the other scenarios? Like what do women usually come in for? Same sort of thing?
So women come in through, they always complain about, not complain, but their biggest frustration is they want to lose a couple of dress sizes. They want to be out drinking champagne with their girlfriends and talking about their personal trainer and how they've changed their lives and things like that. So women come out with this, that whole bikini body image. They're all about, that hourglass figure quite often. They're also very, very time poor, Nicholas. So they've got the household they're running, they've got the 2 kids they're running, and their biggest frustration is they're bloated, they're out of shape, and they're just frustrated, but they don't. Whereas men, it's more, you know, belly fat. Women, it's more they want that bikini or that sexy black dress again. So they want to be. That women approach it, and it's really fascinating. Women approach it totally different, and I'm generalizing obviously a little bit, but the big change that I've noticed in the last 20 years is women are okay to be strong now, whereas women thought, if I'm going to be strong, I'm going to look like Arnold Schwarzenegger, which is a total myth. So women now approach weight loss and think, I can actually lift heavy weight and not put on muscle size, actually can shape and tone. And that was a big hurdle, more so in the 90s, where women would be like, oh no, I don't want a big bum because I'm going to, you know, I don't want muscles. Whereas now, I think Kim Kardashian and these people, they changed the landscape of it.
Yeah.
They really did.
That's really interesting.
Isn't it? Isn't that interesting?
Well, what we think of, it sort of goes also to what we think is attractive. Like, actually, speaking of Arnold Schwarzenegger, there's this sort of documentary he made, like I think right back in the 70s or 80s, where he travels to South America, and they're talking like in the US, like men traditionally consider like large-breasted women to be like the ideal of attraction, right? But in Brazil for a long time, it has been, you know, the butt, and he literally just
exactly.
That's changed in our sort of culture as well.
Totally changed. It's been insane. Like, they even make jeans for women to accentuate their butt. And it's kind of like, it's, you know, but, you know, imagine the 35 to 55-year-old woman that's maybe just had a kid or got a couple. Their biggest frustration is they've lost their body from 10 years ago. That's their biggest frustration. And they want to know the ins and outs of everything.
Yeah.
I don't know, this probably aligns with what you're saying, Fred, because I'm thinking about my wife. She'll always prioritize everything else before she does anything, her exercise. So she'll say, I want to make sure the kids have had breakfast, that the house is clean, that the shopping's done, all this is done, then I'll go out. Whereas I always try and convince her unsuccessfully. I say, do you know what? Go and exercise now if you want to, and you'll feel better mentally, and then you'll be able to do all those other things with more energy.
Totally right. I think my point is women are seeking more perfection when it comes to the journey of weight loss. Whereas men are coming, all right, let's just do it. Let's just get in the trenches. Where, like you said, Nicholas, women think of the big picture. They think of the whole thing, you know. It's quite interesting. Very, very interesting.
I think that's also, from experience, I've known a couple of women in the past, in fact, probably in the early 2000s, so they used to say, no, I won't do weights. I'm not going to do squats because I'm not going to be able to fit into anything. I'm going to get too big. Yeah,
ridiculous. Absolutely. And the media is to blame for that a little bit as well. And we're being brainwashed to think a certain way and to look a certain way. And, you know, at the end of the day, the byproduct and the reason why I love weights so much is because of the way it makes you feel, the way it fires up your neurons, the way it makes you more clear in life, the way it makes you smarter, the way it makes you sleep better, the way, like all the different byproducts. And the research, as you know, Nicholas, is out there about how great weight training is for you. It's just the research each and every day. They talk about cancer patients doing weight training. They talk about all sorts of people that they've done trials on that have done weight training and how it actually feels.
Yeah, I think that's, isn't that like, it's not really a secret, but I often, my dad used to say this to me actually, that it's a shame, because he used to be a runner and a cyclist. And he said it's a shame so many people are wandering around out there thinking exercise is some sort of torture. Says once you get used to it, you discover it's actually like almost like the secret to feeling good, but not just physically, but mentally as well.
Yeah, it's a secret sauce. I mean, going back on my mum, and you know, Nicholas, you know, I talk a lot about my mum, and like here's a woman that's 90 years of age that walks every day. I give her some exercises for home, and she is just not on any medication. She lives close to nature. So she eats foods that are very close to nature.
Mhm.
She's got that 80% nutritional, 20% recreational formula right. And she'll live into her 100s, guaranteed, because she just views life and views exercise as not as a chore or as a punishment.
Yeah.
How did you feel about, remember that series that was out for a while? I don't know if it's still on anymore, but The Biggest Loser, those sorts of television shows, and the trainers who get involved in those.
So one of the first Biggest Losers, Adro, he actually came into our gym and he lost like half his body weight, 60, 70 kilos. I find that it's interesting. I find that it could send triggers to someone watching it thinking, I can do this as well. Mm-hmm. So I think there's some flaws, but what they've found is that there's a lot of againsts. So they've found that and that's why you don't see it these days, is because, again, this is the training to failure that sets you up for failure that I was talking about. It's like, come on, push, push, push. You can do it. You can do it. Whereas it's not, and there's nothing wrong with that. But what happens is if you're doing that every single workout, every single day, you hate it. You become, you hate exercise and you hate doing it. Mm-hmm. And for very large obese people that do this Biggest Loser thing, they found and studies showed that they all put it back on within a year.
Yeah, I've heard that. The first guy, the one who won the first competition, is right back to where he was, if not worse.
So what happens is your metabolism says, I've had enough and I can't go anymore. So I'm just sitting right here. You can go on whatever pills or nutrition program you want. I'm not moving. And the body is so smart that, like I said, and if you optimize your training, which means make it become part of your life, then I think that's the secret sauce that we're talking about. And whether that's cycling or whether that's resistance training or whatever it might be, everyone's got to find their own secret sauce.
That secret sauce approach and sort of integrating training so it's a natural part of your day or your week, like food's a big part of that, I think, for you, isn't it, Fred? Like, yep. From what I've sort of read and heard about your approach, is that like that's something you communicate very clearly to your clients, I suppose? And is that like they can't do what they do with you in the gym if they're not doing the food properly, right? So is that
everyone's got their own approach to food. That's the interesting thing. And everyone's got their own attachment to food, and everyone's got their own mechanisms to food. So look, I've developed an ebook over the 4 decades that's been based on asking clients questions and tweaking, testing and measuring, and keep coming back and keep maining it. There's a couple of things. It's one of the things is food, again, people see it as a reward rather than, and again, same as exercise, they see it as, I'm going to punish myself and go on a diet. And the problem is, the diet's got the DIE word in it, and there's no such thing as a diet. I believe the approach, and what my approach is to food, is eating a lot of whole foods and eating close to nature and sticking with that 80-20% rule. And some people have come to me and said, I'll do your program, but I won't do your food. And I'll be, okay, that's fine, as long as you're doing my program. Now, one of the things that I've discovered over the last couple of years is I fast once a week, and I've done extensive research on fasting, and I find that fasting's a really great way just to calm the body down a little bit and give it a little bit of a break. And some people say, I fasted because I skipped breakfast. I've had, 12 hours of not eating. Well, the science behind fasting, and I don't know if I'm digressing a bit here, I apologize if I am, but the science behind fasting is that if you do it within a 24-hour window and fast after lunch, anywhere between 12 and 2, then you don't go without a day of not eating. So I find that that's where it's really, really great. And
And so you're talking about fasting from after lunch one day through to midday the next.
Correct.
They're effectively sleeping for part of that time.
Yeah.
Whereas if I get up at 6:30 in the morning and don't eat till 6:30 at night, bad. Yeah.
Bad. Because the body's designed to. It's just like, and I talk about this in my book. It's like, imagine a fireplace, and you're throwing a big log in there. It's going to be a slow burn. If you throw small twigs in there, it's going to keep burning, and that's what your stomach's all about. That's exactly how you should think about food. And so what I do is I fast, and my energy levels are through the roof. Actually, unbelievably, like I get great energy levels, and I find that it works. But if someone came to me with a weight loss goal of 30 kilos, I wouldn't suggest fasting initially. I'd suggest that as a goal down the track. So my approach with food, as I said, is different to each individual, because I look at what their relationship is with food first.
Yeah, that's interesting. I like what you said as well, Fred, about people have attachments, like their own little unique attachments. Like, you meet some people and they'll just be like, they can't give up the chocolate. That's their thing. They'll give up everything else, but they won't do that. Other people will be like, I won't give up my drinks, my alcohol. And then there'll be others who'll be more cake or something. There'll be some vice that they think that's impossible to give up.
Yep.
And we've all got one, I think.
Yeah, and I think we have, but and this isn't a long-term, like, I'm not telling them to do it long-term. I'm telling them, let's hit your goal, and then, let's flip it and use it as a reward. So rather than go and buy yourself go and look, like I said, I'm not a drinker. So I have a different relationship to alcohol totally compared to other people. My brother, the footballer, he's a big drinker, or he was a big drinker in that whole wolf pack type of mentality. Whereas I kind of understand, especially in my sport, drinking, it's just not for me. And fortunately enough for me, I have no attachment to food. I don't attach myself to. I don't like chocolate or ice cream, but if I want
Italian guy though, you're meant to have a big attachment.
Yeah, I know.
To food, right?
I know. I was born here, but
I know, Italian background. Hey, let me ask you a question, because it's an interesting one to me. I think that AFL footballers now are much fitter than they were 30 years ago. Is that right?
Look, I see my nephew and my brother. So my brother's played 30 years ago, and my nephew plays as well.
Yeah.
That's definitely right, but a lot of it is all about recovery, getting back on track. But a lot of AFL footballers today, the longevity has shortened. So I think, if you're over 30, you're kind of over the hill to play AFL football. Or
that's injuries and stuff a lot of the time, right?
A lot of injuries, they pound you for that 3 or 4 years, and then you just basically spat out, and then another one comes in. So definitely it's changed. The landscape's changed.
What I found interesting is actually it seems to be happening in reverse in tennis at the moment. Like, there's some of these players, they lasted till they were 29. Now some of them are getting up to almost 40 and they're playing.
Yeah.
It's uncanny. And they're pushing themselves so hard. I'm kind of trying to work out what's going on there.
Maybe they've got really great coaches, and they've worked out their secret sauce. When I look at golfers, for instance, I'm not a golfer, I don't see it, but I remember this golfer, Long John Daly, and I think his waistline was quite large, and he'd know how to hit a ball. But I thought that's an interesting sport, golf. I don't get it personally, but it's an interesting sport.
That's up there. It's getting close to being as unusual as bowling. The bowlers also, they don't need to necessarily have good cardio or weight training. Knock the pins over.
And the great thing with weight training is it's a natural movement. With golf, when you're swinging a golf stick and you're rotating your spine that way, not necessarily the best thing for your body.
Well, and also you do it always on the one side, don't you? You never rotate and balance it out. Yeah. So, Fred,
I'm not here to bag golfers. I think that's great. Good for you.
I don't think you're offending us. I don't think we're golf. Are you a golfer, Cam?
No, I'm not. I feel I'm not old enough yet, but
Or maybe your listeners, any golfers out there, keep at it.
That's true. That's true. Fred, tell us about you're writing a book at the moment. Have you almost finished?
Yeah, the book's done, which I'm
It's
really
done, is it?
yeah, cool.
Yeah, it's done. It's with the wordsmith at the moment, and we're just tweaking it. I'm really, really proud of this book. And so the title of the book is Sweat, Swear and Smile. And it's basically, you know, sweating, swearing and smiling. And the book's all about what kind of some of the stuff we've spoken about in this podcast. So it talks about, you know, the benefits of training bare feet, improving your grip strength, how to approach that food with the 80-20 rule, setting goals, a little bit about my background, obviously, about how life was simpler in the 80s. I talk about coming from a competitive twin, understanding your body type. So the book's got a webinar attached to it where people join the webinar and they get to, you know, we get to dive into the 3 pillars: your nutrition, your training, and your mindset.
Yeah, nice. What's the swearing aspect of it?
It's more the training. So when you swear, and I think, Nicholas, you can vouch for this, swearing's a really good thing with training because it releases a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
And they've found that research shows that swearing is really a great way to just get it out.
I can attest to that. So I had a personal trainer at one point at the ANU gym in Canberra, and I was doing weights training with him, and I sort of like, if I wasn't hitting my target, I wasn't doing something properly, and he sort of pointed out, I kept apologizing.
Yeah.
And he kept telling me not to apologize. So I got into this thing where I started saying, fuck you.
Yeah.
And so we're working out there together, and we're not, I'm sort of pushing, you know, trying to get to the limit. And then I'm saying, fuck you. People are walking past, like thinking these two guys are arguing. It was quite funny, but it worked for us. So I'm actually really looking forward to reading your book in general, but maybe unpack that part of it in particular.
Yeah. And like I said, you know, we've become a bit soft in our way in when we approach things in life. You know, we're looking too much for, you know, the outside, and swearing's a good internal dialogue, if you like, and it's just about getting it out. And if you're not sweating, swearing or smiling, which is having fun, then it's not the right thing for you. And I've seen clients, then they've come to me and I've said, have you ever done weights? And they said no. And I said, do you know what it takes? And then, you know, we'll dive into it. And if I feel like it's not the right thing for them, I won't encourage them to go on that journey, because a lot of people associate, as we spoke earlier, pain with different things. And that whole barometer of pain and where it should be. And it's hard work. Like, it's not easy. It's hard work. You know, didn't Malcolm Fraser say life wasn't meant to be easy?
He did say
I think he spoke about that. I think that was about weight loss. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Do you I like the title because I reckon you're actually basically saying it's passion. You know, all of those things mean that you're committed and it really means something to you.
Yeah.
And there's an emotion behind it, yeah?
Yeah.
And it's completely against the idea of, go to the gym and, you know, just kind of take it easy and walk around, socialize. It's like, as you said, you could do that anytime. The gym's not, it's there to really kind of connect with and to push yourself and to have a bit of drive in what you're doing.
And that's what it was like in the 80s. And that's why I wanted to mimic my own gym to represent something similar to that, where people would go in there. Yep, they'd say, exchange some pleasantries, but then roll up the sleeves and let's get down and dirty.
Yeah. Well, what about, and so in regards to your gym, Real Fit, it's so you got two, don't you? Two gyms?
I've got one, Nicholas. I had 2 gyms where I was, it was just way too busy, and I became a businessman rather than a gym owner. Yeah. So I sold one of the gyms in Paran about 2 years ago, and then now I'm just focusing on the East Malvern business. And you know, I love training men my age, you know, like I love it. I think they can relate to me as well, because they see that I'm an older guy, so I've got a little bit of life experience. So, and unfortunately, there's a lot of young trainers at the moment. Nothing wrong with that, but there's not many of us old timers now at the gym. And
yeah,
yeah,
it's a good point. Like all the trainers I've had have been young guys, and
yeah.
Like some of them have been great, but I hear what you're saying there, because there is relatability is one thing.
Yeah. And I'm thinking it's similar to like sometimes we do coaching like as psychologists, and you can be qualified, like you could be a psychologist or someone who's like 23 years old, but if you're like a 40-year-old or a 50-year-old person, a leader or something in an organization, you really do, even if they got the frameworks and some good advice, you really want someone with some life experience for coaching.
Oh my God. So like I said, nothing against the younger guys, but a lot of the gym personal trainers, they're coming out of uni or they've done a course. And what they do is when they approach their client, they're talking anatomically, basically saying, okay, this movement's going to, at the end of the day, if you don't bring your life skills in and, you know, have a bit of a laugh and yes, do the instruction well, but they wear a different hat, that's for sure. They wear this hat where it's like, okay, we're going to do this movement and it's going to work this. And at the end of the day, you've got to bring your own personality into it. So that's what I found with a lot of the trainers that are younger. They're sort of fearful to say, come on, why did you have that glass of wine? Or what are you going to do next time you're in this situation? How are you going to approach that? So those life skills are a little bit limited, I think. Yeah, but we all got to start somewhere, eh? And that's where I started as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, there's definitely something in there, and it's wisdom as well. Yeah, it's not just experience. Wisdom is underrated, I think, today.
Yeah, and what I find, if you're an older guy and you're training a younger guy, as an older guy, you're going to question them, and they're going to be a little bit fearful because they might not always have the answer to that question. So I'm trying to always have a relative sense of control when I'm training clients. So I'm kind of in control, and they're not telling me what to do. I'm telling them what to do a little bit.
What would your advice be for someone like my dad, he's getting up to 80. He had this year he had open heart surgery. He generally was pretty fit. They actually took, I don't know if you know much about the procedure, but they actually take your heart out of your body. Wow. And they take it out. He sort of laughed afterwards, saying, "It's the only rest my heart has had in." But otherwise pretty fit and healthy. He's always exercised, his cardio, and done all of that. If you got someone like that who's, let's say they're not out of shape, but they're in reasonable shape, but they're a bit older. Weight training, resistance, that's still up for it, no?
Definitely up for it, definitely. Yeah. So, you know, someone like your father, obviously, he would, and we've got people in our gym that are 86 years of age and in their 80s. They're not afraid to move. So I would suggest someone like your father, he's guided by his doctor, number one. So he gets the all clear, which is really, really important. And then he can go on a little bit of a resistance training regime where he gets to use his body weight. Like I said, my mum's in her 90s and I've got her doing hip thrusts at home and I've got her doing body weight stuff. Nothing crazy, but then we reassess it after a couple of weeks and we see, okay, did you do that well? Let's do, like things like that. I also consult for a company called fitat60.com where we do these programs, Nicholas, for people 60 and over, and we talk about, how to stand from a sitting position, and we talk about, all those different things, and, and we take a lot of things for granted with our body, like for women carrying a handbag, and, it's not really good for their spine and things like that, on the computer all the time. So, but going back to your dad, for sure, number one, get the doctors okay. Number two, start with body resistance training. And then once he progresses from there, go into weight training.
Yeah, I think a lot of people sort of in my dad's generation, so that they understand the walking and the cycling side of things, but the weight training thing was always something the meatheads did, like that kind of thing. It wasn't part of what they did when they were growing up, and they don't see it as an option.
But let's say your dad did lawn bowls, for instance. He could actually do some weight training to strengthen his posture when he does lawn bowls. And this is what a lot of people forget about. Let's say I wanted to be a better tennis player, or I wanted to be a better golfer, or whatever sport I love. You can actually do weight training to improve your performance during a sport that you love. And a lot of people forget about that. They see weight training as a little bit of a, as I said, punishment. But if you see it yourself, Nicholas, you can be a better runner if you do weight training a certain way, because it'll activate all your muscles. And when you activate all your muscles, you're going to be a better athlete. And the thing is, we're all athletes. We're just not Olympic athletes. That's the thing.
Yeah, I like the idea of, at the very least, probably the most important exercise is being able to bend down and pick stuff up, and with, groaning and grunt, and if you can build up your muscles and do those sort of common things.
Yeah. And one of those movements is the deadlift that actually makes you understand how to activate those muscles and how to work on, bending and picking things up, and, kettlebell swings and all that kind of great stuff. So a lot of people need to think about, if they want to be a better athlete, whatever their athletic level is, and if they want to be better at their chosen sport, weight training is one of the best things to do.
Well, that's been really great. I really enjoyed the discussion. I think I love the way we jumped on lots of different topics there. We've looked at the social aspect. We've looked at the mental motivation. We've looked at the little habits that people have. When's the book coming out, Fred?
The book will be released early in 2021. So I'll definitely keep you posted on that.
Yeah.
I've been fortunate where I've got a really great domain name called personaltrainer.net, where you can invite your listeners to watch my webinar. They can, have a look at what I do, and, there's no hard sell or anything like that. But if they go to personaltrainer.net, they'll be able to find out what their body type is, whether they're an ectomorph, endomorph, or mesomorph, and without going, because that's a separate podcast altogether, but that would determine how they should view their body when it comes to health and fitness.
You might just put yourself an invitation back there, Fred. That sounds like a whole other.
It's a good idea. Yeah.
Yeah, no problem.
Personaltrainer.net.
Yep.
Fantastic. Thanks again, Fred, and enjoy the weekend.
Yeah,
love to. Thanks, guys. I really appreciate your time.
Thanks for joining us.
No problem.
All right. Well, Cam, another showdown.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that.
I did too. I think I really enjoy. I think. Well, let's face it. In popular culture right now.
Yeah.
More than ever before. I mean, fitness and diets and everything. I mean, it's got to be right up there, right? It's like the number one or two most interesting topics, or at least the ones that people love to debate, don't they? I mean, there's so many things we could have covered. We could have talked about the caveman diet.
I mean, you could do a whole session on diet. I mean, one of the things I find confusing, and actually we've spoken about this before, but conflicting advice, like, over the years, there'll be a study saying you should drink 1.5 glasses of red wine a day, that'll have, beneficial effects for all kinds of things. And then next year there'll be one saying you shouldn't drink any red wine, and a little bit of dark chocolate's good. No, it's not. But I mean, I tend to think balance personally, I don't always follow it. That's what I think. Yeah.
Yeah, I made a bad joke once at a dinner party, because this lady was telling me everything in moderation, and I said, "Oh, even plutonium," and she kind of gave me this look like, "That's ridiculous."
Yeah, there is a book I haven't read, but called. I guess this will segue into reading or listening. why French people don't get fat. I think it's something like that, and it's sort of saying, you can eat the chocolate eclair, but you can just only eat like this tiny amount of it.
Oh,
and
right.
you have some salad and you have a little bit of that and this. And I remember a couple of years ago I was at a conference overseas somewhere, and there was a French woman there, and we were kind of discussing that sort of thing. And she said, in France, it's like really common to have a glass of wine with lunch, like even in the office or be a cafeteria, but it'd be like one small glass of wine.
Doesn't the Queen have like a brandy or something with lunch every day as well?
Yeah, I think I've read something like that. She does.
I know. Actually, it might be a glass of champagne or something, I think.
Yeah. I read this article maybe in the last year or so. Yeah, and the Queen's like 95 now.
There's always a bit of a myth though where people go and they find one of the oldest people, and then they look at their lifestyle and go, if you live exactly like that, you'll live to over 100. But you got to question. Sometimes they'll say, I drank every day and I smoked and all this stuff, and you go, oh, that could just be a bit of genes and good luck at play there.
Yeah, this is true.
Are you reading anything of interest?
I'm in a funny position this week because I've been insanely busy with work and family catch-ups, and I haven't been reading. But I sort of have a topic I wanted to canvass in relation to. I could be reading or watching or anything really, but I saw someone make a comment on Twitter of all places the other day saying they'd gone back and read Ernest Hemingway, actually a book called To Have and Have Not, and they were finding it really problematic from I think they're referring to sort of like, race and gender and things like that. And I was kind of wondering about like shows we might, we don't feel they work today, or books that we feel don't work today, or can they still work? And my first reaction to this was like, kind of, I took exception to it because I thought, well, I really enjoyed reading Hemingway, like from, a storytelling point of view and the way he uses English. And I think beyond that, it is part of history, right? So you have to, when you read something like that, you might not approve of individual words he's using or descriptions of people, but you can't get too hung up on that. And it's sort of, you can't strike it from the record.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, it's very difficult to judge the history with the standards of today. And it's always has been. I mean, in 100 years, we'll probably look back at today saying all these things that we accepted as and the sort of language we used.
Yeah, I wonder. There was a debate recently actually about Gone with the Wind, and it was removed by a BBC streaming service, I think, and then it was put back on with a kind of disclaimer. But one of the odd things about it was, like in that movie, I think it's Hattie McDowell was the first African-American woman to win an Oscar. So it's kind of like, of course there's racial stereotypes in that movie and, depictions of slavery and all of that, and that should be seen for what it is. But I remember when I was studying literature at university, like there was one professor who thought that certain books should be removed from the canon, was the expression. In fact, one of the books you'll be familiar with, The Heart of Darkness, by Joseph Conrad, which you'll remember from school days. But that book, it uses like some offensive words, obviously. And so that idea, the book should be taken out. And I don't know, I struggle with it. I think in general, people should make up their own minds. I'm not saying there aren't, exceptions to that.
Yeah. Do you think it's because people worry about media being in circulation that influences other people's thinking? Like they worry that the person reading it or the groups reading it, somehow it'll add to the stereotype. So like, let's say it's a book like Heart of Darkness or other ones, which has got like racist dialogue in it.
Yeah.
Then I reckon the concern might be that people think if we leave that in circulation, it somehow is contributing to persistent racism over time, or like the standard, we're accepting that standard still.
I think so. I think they might, without speaking for other people, but they might say it normalizes. And a lot of the time it gets down to, dialogue. Like even now, like it's, we don't use certain words in conversation that, might have been used 50 years ago. And in general, that's a good thing. Like, we're more mindful of people might take exceptions to certain, casual forms of racism and sexism and also homophobia. I do think, in general, of course, that's a good thing. But when you can't airbrush literature, I suppose. I mean, there's a story out there today or yesterday, I'm not sure if you saw it, but they're talking about, just a little bit different, but making a movie depicting the Port Arthur massacre years ago back in the 90s. And I don't know the answer to that one, actually. My first response was, well, they should make the movie. But then I heard an interview and talking about how difficult that's going to be for the families, and the survivors who are still, around. And I'm pretty sympathetic to that. But it's like, well, what stories don't we tell?
Yeah, that is a tricky one. I'm not sure I know the answer to that one either. But I like your suggestion, though, that I think that if something's written in history, especially if you're writing for a character set in a time where people did say sexist, racist things like worse than today, if you're actually writing to that era and trying to be historically accurate, then you're actually, in some ways, it can be seen as a commentary of that time as well.
Yeah, in fact, and that kind of brings me back to the start, because the irony with this Hemingway thing was, like into have and have not, there is a lot of machismo and all that sort of thing, but Hemingway is actually critiquing characters through that. So it's like, even though he's using certain descriptions, but that's kind of on the surface, and you can get sort of hung up on that. But if you dig deeper with what he's doing, he's critiquing, characters who are like, hyper masculine and all that sort of stuff, and he's critiquing systems and all that kind of thing. So I guess that's probably where I was disappointed with it. Like sometimes, people are focusing on the surface and not digging a bit deeper with what the story's really about.
Yeah. Well, because I think that, for instance, like you could go really far with this, right? You could look at the series Mad Men, which basically, that definitely is a commentary, that show. It is making a statement about that time, that period, and it was doing it probably exaggerating a little bit, but in some ways it wasn't. And I think that's how those advertising agencies were. And in fact, a lot of workplaces were like that.
Yeah, it's a good example. I actually asked my parents to watch an episode or two with that, and obviously they were in Melbourne in the 60s, not in New York, but I think my dad said to me, like, The Office wasn't all that different to like what you saw in the show, in terms of like, having a bar in your office was pretty common. And I mean, like, gender relations in the office were like a world apart from what they are today.
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? Because I think, and the danger is as well, is that even if you could build the case to censor like literature, even if you could build that case to say there are some forms of literature that you should just wipe because it'll be some sort of benefit to society, you then have to fall into that difficult situation as to who makes the call on what needs to be censored, and what if, not everyone agrees. So all sorts of people will come up with things that they don't like, and they'll start to say, oh, well, maybe we should get rid of all these other books, and maybe we should get rid of, there's a book I find quite amusing, which I never read, but I remember, I think we had it in our house, but Darren Hinch actually had a diet book.
Maybe I remember this.
Yeah, back in the 90s, he wrote a book about how he lost weight, and
that's right.
Yeah, it was basically he basically had a swimming pool, and he had a bit of money, and he used to heat the swimming pool in winter, and he said he'd just do like laps of the pool every morning for like an hour or 2 hours.
Yeah. And then go and have lunch at Romeo's, I think. Yeah,
well, interestingly, then he'd then talk about how red wine was a feature of the diet as well.
Yeah, I do remember. I wish we asked Fred about this, actually. I do remember that, because I can kind of remember like seeing Darren Hinch around town a little bit growing up, and he had a Cadillac or something, which was a really exotic thing to have, in Melbourne in the 80s and 90s. And
yeah, but you could definitely go through lots of books like that, or even the controversial guy Pete Evans now. Why don't we censor all these things, because they're sharing bad ideas about dieting and health and things that people can't achieve, or unhealthy habits, and you kind of go, well, you know what? There's lots of books on the shelf there that are not very good, and they give you bad advice, and they've got bad characters who are reprehensible, but. Maybe let's just leave it up to the people to decide, and through the market, the market ultimately will decide whether or not it's valuable.
That's a good pre-market, opinion. I tend to agree with it, actually, but yeah.
Well, I think it's time to wrap up another episode of It's About Nothing.
Yes.
So I don't think we introduce the topic today. We did. It was about health and fitness, the psychology of health and fitness, and now that we're coming into the weekend, I have a feeling that maybe some of the podcasts will rub off on me, and I'll think, do I really need that extra glass of wine? Because Fred's put in my mind that it's 300, 400 calories, which is pretty alarming.
Yeah, that really jumped in my mind too. So I think I'm going to be quite conscious of that. And we're moving into that time of year where it's getting close to Christmas, and there's especially some post-pandemic lockdown family reunions. So we have a lot of incentives to enjoy ourselves, but perhaps we need to keep moderation in mind.
Yeah, indeed. Well, enjoy the weekend.
Yeah, you too.
Thanks. See ya.